Let me just get comfortable here.
Hi, this is John Sarver, and this is My Solar Story, sponsored by GLREA and Michigan Solar Users Network. And tonight we have John Freeman, the Executive Director of GLREA, going to talk about state legislation. And John has been involved in a lot of different policy issues over the years, including healthcare reform and raising the minimum wage, but he's been actively involved in renewable energy for quite a few years now. And we just thought that, our typical My Solar Story has been somebody talking about their own experience with the solar system on their home typically, but it could be a church or other sort of building. But we know there's a lot of interest in what's been happening in the state legislature. And there's a new session just starting up now. So John, of course, being our executive director, is our advocate and in front of the legislature and the governor's office and state agencies. So with that, let me turn it over to John.
Well, thank you very much, John. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on your Solar Stories program. And I just want to make a couple of introductory comments. First of all, it's been a real honor to serve as the executive director of GLREA. I believe that this organization is an incredibly important organization because we are working on something which is fundamentally changing the United States and changing the world, which is transitioning how we generate the electricity we need to run our homes, our businesses, our cars. And we're doing this because we're going to be able to save money because renewable energy is less expensive. We're doing this because it's clean energy in the sense that the wind and the sun doesn't create any pollution. And so we're going to see a lot better public health outcomes because we're not emitting smoke or smog or any chemicals into the air, and nor are we generating nuclear energy waste that has to sit for hundreds, if not thousands of years before it's safe. And then finally, clean energy, wind, solar, geothermal is not creating any kind of carbon pollution. And so we're going to be addressing climate change as well. And so I just want to, again, state how much of a pleasure it is to work for this organization. I work for the board of directors of this organization, but most importantly, I work for all the members of this organization, the individuals and the businesses that pay the dues, pay my salary, pay the operating funds for this organization. Now, every person that works for an organization brings together a set of skills that they developed prior to becoming an executive director of such an organization. And I just happened to have served in the Michigan legislature for 6 years. I was elected in November of 1992. And so I served 6 years. I only served 6 years because on the same ballot that I was elected, that term limits was enacted. And so the clock started running with me, my generation. So I had the honor of serving with legislators who had been there for a couple of decades. But we all started off kind of on the same level in the January of 1993. So under current state law, you're only allowed to serve 3 terms and each term is a 2-year term in the Michigan House of Representatives. And then if you serve in the state Senate, they're 4-year terms and you're allowed to serve 2 terms there. I've never served in the Senate. I've only served in the House. I represented a district in Southeast Michigan, all of Madison Heights, which is where I live, all of Hazel Park, and then the southern half of Royal Oak. So it was a real honor and to serve in the legislature. Every day I walked in the Capitol, I was just in awe of the building because it's an absolutely beautiful building and it represents something. It represents a symbol for the people of this wonderful state that we have a way of governing ourselves. But before I go any further, I want to state at the outset that normally on these solar stories, the speaker talks for a half hour and then they take questions for a half hour. I want to change it up a little bit tonight because I want to make this presentation as informative to all of you as I possibly can be. So I want to encourage people, if you have a question that you want to ask, even while I'm speaking, just raise your hand because, I have found over the years that questions that people have, other people may in fact have been thinking about the exact same point, but were hesitant to raise their hand. And so I'd rather just, steer the conversation the way the questions are. Because one of the things I don't really know is how familiar all of you are with the legislative process. So I don't want to be redundant and talk about things you may already know. And so if you do have a point or a comment or a question to ask, that will help lead me. But I am going to start off with a set of remarks. And the outline I have laid out is, why do we care about the state legislature? And then I'm going to talk about an example of a law that was enacted, which speaks to why we need to be thinking about the state legislature. And then I want to talk a little bit about the mechanics of legislative action. How does it work? And then I want to talk about the politics of enacting legislation. And that is a little bit different than the mechanics of how a bill works. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about building support for legislation, because that's key. And that is what the renewable energy industry is in fact trying to do right now. And then I finally want to kind of finish up with kind of a concluding comment about why I'm kind of nudging the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association to get involved in the legislative process. Now, we have to be careful about this because as a 501c3 organization, and that means it's an IRS tax, nonprofit, tax-free organization, we're limited to about 25% of our budget on how much we can lobby or get involved with the legislature. So we have to be careful. Now, if we do set up, and we did set up a sister organization, what's known as a 501c4, and that allows you to do unlimited lobbying or unlimited work in the legislature. But the difference is that those contributions to that organization are not tax deductible. And so one of the ways that we finesse it is that a traditional 501c3 is an educational organization. And so a lot of what we do isn't per se lobbying, but it's in fact educating legislators about these bills. Because one of the fundamental things about the legislative process is that the people that get elected to the legislature, they have to vote on every single bill, which covers every single topic. But it doesn't mean that these legislators know much about areas beyond that which they worked on in their professional life prior to getting elected. And that includes myself. I mean, I'll tell you a quick funny story. When I was first elected at the ripe age of 32, I had no idea what Medicare or Medicaid was, or what the difference was between the two. But I rapidly learned, and I learned from organizations that would want to come and meet with me, and I would learn about the issues that they were concerned about. And so that's how I feel GLREA is all about, is that we need to educate legislators about renewable energy, about why it saves homeowners and farmers and business money. Why is it a great economic development tool? Why does it create so many jobs? How is it that it in fact improves public health outcomes? And then finally, how is it so important that we make the transition to renewable energy in order to fight climate change? So all of these are educational things, and that's why I feel relatively comfortable to doing the work we're doing in the legislature, just as long as we don't go too far. So let me go back to my first bullet point. Why do we care about the legislature? And it's really simple. It's a system of power that is set up in our state to make decisions regarding policy. And there are two fundamental types of policy that we make. One is, how do we spend all the taxpayer dollars that flow to state government? And that's what the Appropriations Committee does. And they will appropriate money based upon the interests of legislators and based upon the interests of the governor. And that's where the push and pull is, because everyone has different ideas on how best to spend taxpayer dollars. And that's just a part of the legislative process. And then, of course, the other major area are non-budget type items, which is purely public policy. And that essentially is you pass bills in order to establish what I call a policy framework, which guides the direction of our state. And obviously this occurs at the federal level as well, but on a larger scale. So let me give you an example of how policy can establish a policy framework. And I'm going to make it directly about what we're all about here, renewable energy. Back in 2008, Governor Granholm and the legislature, which at that time, the House was Democratic and the Senate was Republican, they passed a landmark bill called Public Act 295. And this was the original legislation that essentially established in the modern era the beginnings of the renewable energy transition in the state of Michigan. There are two key elements well, actually, there are three key elements of this bill, but two key elements apply to renewable energy. The first one is that it established a renewable portfolio standard of 10%, which means that the utilities that the Public Service Commission regulates, they had to, by 2015, so they had 7 years to do this, they now had to have at least 10% of all the electricity they produced now had to come from renewable energy sources, primarily wind and solar. And so that forced the utilities to go out and actively start developing solar energy projects and wind energy projects. So if you ever drive up north of Lansing and you see all those wind turbines, or you go into the Thumb area, or you go east of Cadillac, Michigan, and you see all those wind turbines, all of those started as a result of the Public Act 295 that was enacted in 2008. And as a tangent, Governor Granholm is now going to become the head of the Department of Energy under Joe Biden. And a large reason why she has the intellectual chops to take that position is because of the work she did in establishing Public Act 295 and the work she did in her remaining years in the legislature to follow up with that act. There was a lot of skepticism about that act and about the renewable portfolio standard, but it worked exactly how it was intended. It jump-started the renewable energy market in Michigan, and it in fact created a demand for renewable energy in this state. And so that caused the development of solar and wind energy technology. And it created a market demand for it. And so it was a push to develop it and to modernize it and to be innovative in order to be more effective in generating more electricity as time wore on. The other major piece of Public Act 295 is that it granted the right of individuals and small business to generate their own electricity by owning their own solar system and even a small wind system or a geothermal system. And that is a critical piece of legislation because it still has an impact today, because that Public Act 295 established a 1% cap, which limits how many renewable energy systems are the regulated utilities legally required to install to the grid system of wires. Now, at the time, back in 2008, as I said a minute ago, we really didn't know how successful these policies would be. It was all kind of experimental. And so the legislature sometimes is conservative. And in this case, they limited the number of solar systems to just 1% of the total electrical output that utilities produce. But what happened is that, and also it established a net metering system, which basically said that if your solar system produces more electricity than you can use, And solar systems generally do this in the summertime when the days are long and there's a lot more sunshine. And that if you have extra electricity you're producing than you're consuming, then you can literally sell it back to the utility, and the utility would give you a credit for the exact same amount that you pay for electricity. In other words, the retail rate. And so currently you pay about 16 cents per kilowatt hour for buying electricity from DTE or Consumers or Indiana Michigan Power or the Upper Peninsula Power Company. And under the old net metering rule, if you sold electricity back to the utility, you would get a credit of around 16 cents. So then in the months like now, you would draw upon these bank credits, and you'd be able to use electricity for free because you kind of built up a savings account of electricity that you generated over the summer. Now, the reason why this is important is that 1% bill, that 1% clause is still in effect. And, recently, Consumers Energy reached that 1% in December, and legally they were not required to connect any more systems to the grid if they didn't want to, because this was governed by state law. Now, it turns out that they decided to voluntarily increase that 1% to 2%, but only because of a deal was reached with the Public Service Commission. Now, this deal wasn't overt. It wasn't a part of any kind of a ratepayer process, but consumers came out publicly in late November and said, we'll raise the 1% to 2% if we get the distributed generation tariff that we've asked for from the Public Service Commission. Now, my semi-cynical view of the world, though I think it's a very much accurate analysis, is that the consumers was sending a direct signal to the Public Service Commission. It was a way for them to influence the Public Service Commission's decision, because everyone knows that the Public Service Commission by mid-December was going to make a decision regarding the new DG tariff. And so consumers, by sending that signal, that probably influenced the decision by the Public Service Commission. But I want to go back. I want to now fast forward to 2016. By 2015, the 10% renewable portfolio standard was reached. It turned out to be relatively easy for the utilities to meet that 10% mark. And during that 7-year period, we saw a lot of businesses in Michigan, small scale solar business, blossom and take off and grow. We saw a lot of larger companies from around the country come to Michigan and build the wind and solar. And during those 7 years, the cost of producing solar and wind energy dramatically went down. And so by 2015 and 16, it was clear that renewable energy was going to cost less to produce than coal, less to produce than nuclear power. And the trend was already clearly there that ultimately it was going to be cheaper than natural gas. Natural gas is very cheap right now because of fracking, but historically the cost of natural gas has fluctuated. And we saw that even though it's cheap now, it may not be cheaper later. But as a result of that 7 years of progress from 2008 to 2015, we saw that renewable energy went down. So in 2016, this is now, the legislature is controlled by Republicans. And there was a major effort to, I don't want to use the word update, but it was to make changes to the 2008 law. And this was driven by Senator Mike Knopf, who is the chair of the Senate Energy Committee. And a couple of things happened on the 2016 law. The first one was that the renewable portfolio standard was increased from 10% to 15%. And the utilities had to now generate 15% of all their electricity from renewable energy sources by 2021. And it also changed net metering. It didn't change net metering overnight, but it set into motion a process that the legislation that was enacted ordered the Public Service Commission to come up with a new system for compensating, the extra solar energy that's put on the grid. The phrase net metering was changed to distributive energy tariff, and it ordered the Public Service Commission to do this. So the first year after the Public Service Commission, after this legislation was enacted in 2016, the Public Service Commission did an internal analysis about what kind of structure that they thought was appropriate for the new DG tariff. And then after June 1st of 2018, anytime a utility filed a new rate case, they would have to go through a process with the Public Service Commission of determining the specifics of what the new DG tariff would be. And just the first one to do that was DTE, and then UPCO and Indiana Michigan Power did it. And the last major one was Consumers Energy. And that decision was made, just like I mentioned a minute ago, in December. So the new DG tariff essentially, and I'm skipping over a lot of detail, but we can go into this more in detail either tonight or down the road. But rather than your credit being compensated at the same retail rate as you buy electricity from Consumers or DTE, now you're only getting about half as much. You're getting the cost of energy. The specific formula is the cost of energy minus transmission. And so it's not the retail rate, it's about 8 cents. And so again, I have some of my suspicions, but I think what the intent on the part of the utilities is to undercut the economics of installing a small scale solar system for homeowners or for a small business, to try and discourage people from installing solar. But I think it's a bad strategy for a couple reasons. And I'm kind of going off on a tangent here if I'm talking about the legislative process. But I think it's important to understand that there's a fundamental law called the law of unintended consequences, which gears its head in the legislative process and even after legislation is enacted, is that sometimes, legislators' best intentions or interest groups' best intentions don't actually occur in reality. Now, as I said, Public Act 295 in 2008 did in fact work just like it was predicted. But I think the utilities' effort to undercut, the number of people installing solar energy system is going to fail for 3 reasons. Number one, the cost of installing solar has continuously decreased. So the cost of installing a solar system now versus 3 years ago is much less. Number two, the utilities keep increasing the cost. They keep increasing how much it costs to buy electricity from the utilities. Consumers, just last December, they asked for a 14% increase in utility electricity, and the Public Service Commission granted over 11% for residential rates. And so by increasing the cost of buying electricity from a utility, you're giving people more of an economic incentive to install your own solar system, because when you own your own solar system, you're in complete control of energy production in your house. The cost of installing the system is all up front. And once you pay off your system in 8 or 9 or 10 years, because the panels are warranted for 25 years, you're going to get free electricity for 15 years or so. And the other factor is that the federal government is providing a financial incentive to install a solar system, the investment tax credit. It was supposed to go down to 22% this January 1st of 2021, but the COVID bill that was enacted back in December by under the Democrats in the House, Republicans in the Senate, the bill was mainly about helping to deal with COVID and the economic crisis this country is facing, but it also restored the investment tax credit back up to 26% for 2 more years. And so that means that you can literally deduct 26% of the cost of installing your solar system, you can reduce that amount by 26% by reducing your federal income tax by the exact same amount. And so I think now under the Biden administration, yesterday he signed an executive order, once again making this country a part of the Paris climate talks. And there's, Jennifer Granholm is going to be head of Department of Energy. I think we're going to see a lot more action out of the federal government to support renewable energy across this country and across the world. And so I think we're going to be in a position that's going to be a very exciting time over the next 4 years. Okay, let me go back to the mechanics of the legislature. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free. There are 110 state reps. There are 38 state senators. To pass legislation in the House and Senate, you have to get one more than half, a simple majority, in order to enact a bill in the House and Senate. And of course, you have to get the governor to support the bill as well. But before a bill gets to the floor, either the Senate floor or the House floor, it has to first come out of committee. And so any legislator can introduce a bill, and then the Speaker of the House or the Senate Majority Leader or their staff, they will send the bill to the appropriate committee. And there's a committee, committees are established regarding jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction. And so for our purposes, all the bills that we primarily care about, they're going to go to either to the House Energy Committee, which is chaired by Representative Joseph Polina, who is from Monroe. And we're going to get back to Joseph in a few minutes. Or it goes, if it's a Senate committee, it will go to the Senate Energy and Technology Committee, which is chaired by Senator Lowers, who lives up in the Thumb area in Brockway. And so a bill gets assigned to a committee, and this is where the bill is discussed in detail. This is where interest groups can come and testify in support or against the bill. This is where legislators learn a lot about the bills. And this is also where a legislator can try and amend the bill in committee. And ultimately, if there are enough votes on the committee, and again, it's a simple majority on a committee in order to get it passed, if the bill can gain, the majority vote on the committee, then the bill will pass out of that committee and go to the floor. There are many steps along the legislative process to kill legislation. The first thing that can happen, of course, is that the Speaker of the House or the Senate Majority Leader can sign the bill to a wrong committee deliberately to try and bury the bill. Or he can assign the bill to the right committee, but the chairman of the committee never schedules the bill for a hearing. Or the committee chair can schedule the bill for a hearing. You can take testimony, but then the chairman never schedules the bill for a vote. They just take testimony. And there are many different reasons why a chair may do this. In the Senate committee, the Senate Energy and Technology Committee, there are 10 senators on there. There are 7 Republican and there are 3 Democrat. And I don't know how many there are in the House. It's a larger number, but because the House is controlled by Republicans, they have a clear majority as well. Now, the chair of the committee is very important. And what tends to happen is that people try and become chairs of committees on industries that's really important to their district back home. Tip O'Neill always said, all politics is local, and that applies at the state legislative level as well. And so in the case of Joseph Bolina, he is from Monroe. So what is located in Monroe? The biggest coal plant, one of the biggest in the country, and it also has nuclear power plants down there, and they're all owned by DTE. So Joseph Bolina has a huge financial interest with DTE in his backyard. And in fact, DTE provides about half of all the taxes to the city of Monroe. So DTE has an inordinate amount of influence in Monroe, and therefore Joseph Bolina cares deeply about these power plants because they pay a lot of taxes, they provide a lot of jobs, and that's just the way the world ticks. And so one of our challenges is we have to convince Joseph Bolina that our legislation is important and that he should schedule a bill he should schedule a vote for these bills. And this past 2 years, he has not been willing to do it on several important bills. The 1% cap bill that we care about, the microgrid bills that the city of Ann Arbor is really interested in. He hasn't been willing to hold a vote on these bills because who knows why, but I think it's pretty clear that because the utilities are totally opposed to these bills, that he listens to the utilities. Now, I want to go off on a quick tangent for a moment. I want to make it really clear that whichever party is in power has a tremendous amount of influence over the shape of the legislature, the bills that are taken up in the legislative process. That's why elections matter. That's why organizations get involved with elections, because they have a direct impact on the ability to formulate public policy, which can have a tremendous influence in a state. Now, we have Gretchen Whitmer as a Democrat. She campaigned on renewable energy. So having her as the governor of the state of Michigan is a major win for us. Under the last 2 years of the Snyder administration, our colleague here, Mark Cleavey, he championed a bill to remove property taxes on people that installed a solar system. This was something that the tax tribunal unilaterally decided to do, and there was nothing in state law to prevent them from doing this. There was a law for a while under Governor Engler that did not allow for taxation of solar systems for local units of government for property taxes, but that law had a time limit on it. And when it expired, of all places, Ann Arbor started to impose property taxes on people with solar. So Mark Cleavey, after he tried to appeal this decision, we couldn't get it done through the regulatory apparatus of the state tax tribunal. We then created legislation to override this tax tribunal, and we got it past the House and the Senate. And the utilities, frankly, didn't care. It didn't matter to them. But Governor Snyder vetoed the bill, and he gave silly reasons for doing that. But he had the power. He vetoed it. And so we had to start over again in the beginning of 2019. And what happened was we reintroduced the bill. It passed the House and the Senate very quickly. You have to start all over the whole process over again. It's a 2-year cycle. So we had to go back to the committee process in both the Senate committee as well as the taxation committee in the House. It wasn't the House Energy Committee, but they passed those committees. They went to the Senate and House floor. They passed overwhelmingly on a bipartisan basis. And this time, Governor Whitmer immediately signed the bill and it became law. And so now throughout the state of Michigan, no longer can local units of government raise property taxes if you install a solar system while you're living there. Now, when under Michigan law, once you sell your house, you're under Proposition 13, going back way back when under John Engler was governor, your house can be reappraised at market value. And we think that because your house does improve value by having a solar system, that the property taxes will probably go up a little bit once you sell your home. But remember, the people buying the house, they are getting a solar system that's which is covered by, they don't have to pay a loan to put it in. They're buying the house, paid for the system, and they're going to get free electricity for many, many years. And so I think it's a very fair system that the way this works. So let's go back now. So anybody can introduce a bill, but to actually make the bill move through the system, this is where politics comes into play. Because first of all, is the bill popular with the broader public? Does the public understand the value of the legislation you're trying to move? Because if the public does understand the legislation and the public immediately supports it, that carries a lot of clout, because the broad public support can turn into either overt pressure on legislators, or they can provide legislators with political cover in order to feel comfortable in supporting a bill. And of course, if the media is publicly saying what a great piece of legislation it is, and they're getting a lot of exposure to it, that is also a form of lobbying or gentle pressure or political cover, which helps legislators know that what they're doing will be popular. Legislators don't like to upset people. That's a cardinal rule of politics. You want to make friends because legislators want to get reelected. And if they start passing legislation that their constituents don't like, then they're going to make enemies and they may not get their votes. And so self-interest is a fundamental force in politics. And so what we have to do is make it in the self-interest of a legislator to support the bill. And there are different techniques of doing this. But in terms of the politics, if we're pushing a bill, we need to get the votes to pass a bill out of committee. So we need to formulate arguments to the members on each of the committees on why they should support the bill. We can do that by testifying in front of the committee and presenting testimony. We can also do that by having people from within their district write letters, make phone calls, send emails to them. And we can get interest groups who have a broad constituency across the state to endorse the bill, and for them to express their interest that they want the legislator to support the bill. And so additional part of the politics is, what is the constituencies of the legislature? In other words, if you're representing a rural district like Lowers, Dan Lowers in the UP, the thumb of the state of Michigan, they have a lot of farmers there. A lot of farmers love renewable energy because energy is a huge cost to a farm. A lot of farmers think in terms of generations. They make investments now knowing they're going to be an investment for 20, 30 years. And if they can figure out, if they can install a renewable energy system that's going to reduce the cost of energy for their farm, they're going to make that farm much more productive and more profit making, because they can reduce the overhead of energy. And so if a lot of farmers contact, or if the Farm Bureau contacts Dan Lowers saying, we love this bill, then Dan Lowers is going to listen very carefully. If small businesses in Dan Lowers' district or any district say, we love this renewable energy because I've got a roof on my small business, I can install solar, I can reduce my overhead. If the small businesses, support it, and they contact Lowers or the other members on the committee, that carries a lot of clout. If a lot of homeowners contact legislators, that carries a lot of clout too. So that's all about the politics behind bills that can make a real impact. And what's really important for organizations like ours, or unions, or the Farm Bureau, or for the Chamber of Commerce, is that anytime they're trying to push a piece of legislation, they have to try and figure out what are the forces that influence a state legislator or a state senator. And then they try and get those folks to express their opinions about the bill and try and get them to support the bill. And then that in turn will be gentle pressure on the legislator to support it in committee. And once the bill goes to the floor, same thing. You have to get the 20 votes in the state Senate, and in order to move it. You also need to court the leadership in the Senate as well, because sometimes a bill can come out of committee, but it doesn't necessarily get a vote on the floor unless the Senate Majority Leader is very supportive of the bill as well. And Dan Lowers, the chair of the committee, if he supports the bill and comes out of his committee, then you want Dan Lowers to go to the Senate Majority Leader and say, hey, my committee just passed this bill to eliminate the 1% cap. It's very important. The committee members all thought it was important. And, Senator Shirkey, who is the Senate Majority Leader, please schedule this bill. It's very important. And once a bill passes the Senate and then has to go to the House, or it can be the other way around. If a bill passes the House, it then goes to the Senate. Sometimes the identical bill can be introduced in the House and Senate, and it will be working its way simultaneously. The Senate Energy Committee is taking up the Senate bill, the House Energy Committee is taking up the House bill, and then they'll go on the floor of each of the House and the Senate. And if they get passed, then they're going to crisscross. And several things can happen. First of all, that bill will immediately go to the committee, again, to the Senate Energy Committee if it's a House bill, and the Senate committee will look it over, and either they can support the bill as it is and not make any changes, and they can vote it out and it'll go to the Senate floor, or they can make amendments and it can go to the Senate floor. And so the Senate floor, the bill that originated in the House. But if the bill that passes the Senate, which originally was a House bill, is now different than what the House voted on the bill, that new version of the House bill goes back to the House, and the House can either concur in those changes, they can agree to the new version on a floor vote, or they can reject it. And then what happens? They have a conference committee, where a bill will go to the conference and they'll have discussions, and the conference committee will be made up of House and senators, and then they'll discuss the bill and try and come to a consensus. And then that bill will go back to the House and Senate for a final vote. So the process is complex, but it's frankly designed in a democratic way, with a caveat that the party that's in power has more influence, but it's designed to give a very, very detailed examination of the bill. But the downside is that there are many steps to kill a bill. Okay, now it's 7:43, so I'm talking a lot, and I want to make sure I cover a few more things. I want to talk about some other kind of factors that play into this. And this is the reality of legislators. Legislators need to get elected. And so part of their calculation in supporting a bill is, again, who supports the bill and who's against the bill. If people that supported the bill supported the legislator in helping them get elected with campaign contributions, they knocked on doors, they made phone calls for the legislator, that carries influence. Or the reverse is also true. If the organizations that are opposed to the bill, if they help the legislator get elected with campaign contributions, packed hours, door knocking, whatever, then that carries a lot of clout as well. And so a lot of organizations, they get involved with elections to help legislators on a bipartisan basis, because they know they will have more influence with legislators if a bill comes down the road that either they very much in support or very much against. Now, if you ever have a legislator that tells you that campaign contributions has no impact on me, on how I vote, they're not telling you the truth. Now, they may think that has no influence on them, but they're not being honest, because it absolutely does. And that is where the system can be manipulated, because campaign contributions are frankly a legalized form of bribery. I mean, I don't want to be that crass about it, but it frankly, to a degree, is. Now, there's some states in the country where even at the state legislative level, the campaigns are funded by public tax dollars. The state of Maine has a system where if you're running for the state house or the state senate in Maine, you don't have to raise money from interest groups or the private sector. You can get money from taxpayer dollars to fund your campaigns. And that makes you completely independent because you're not relying upon the interest groups to help you either get elected or get reelected. But we don't have that in Michigan. And so, frankly, the utilities, they spend a tremendous amount of money in campaign contributions. They have a political action committee. They can give up to 5,000 or, in the House every 2 years, they can give up to 10,000, I think it is, for a state Senate candidate, whereas individuals give a lot smaller amounts. I think it's 500 for I think it's 500 or 1,000 in the House and maybe 1,000 to 2,000 in the Senate. You're waving at me. You got a question?
Yeah, John, I think it would be helpful because we got about 15 minutes left before we get to 8 o'clock for you to
Okay.
tell the folks what our legislative priorities is for this next year.
Yeah.
Okay, that
Because
sounds-
there's a lot of legislation that obviously is going to be proposed and we're going to have to focus on certain things. I think people would be interested in what's kind of at the top of our list.
Yes, I think it's very good, John. The top of our list, I think, are two key bills. The first one is the 1% bill. Even though Consumers Energy agreed to increase the cap from 1% to 2%, that essentially will buy us probably about 2 years before they hit that cap again. DTE is a much bigger company than Consumers. And even though they haven't hit their 1% cap yet, they project it will be a minimally of another year, that there's an exponential growth in the number of small solar systems that are being installed in Michigan. And so we're going to hit that cap quickly under given. So we need to lift this cap. And we were unable to do it in the last 2 years. We had pretty good support, broad support from a number of different groups, but we need to build greater support in order to offset the influence of the utilities who are dead set against this bill. And so we're going to work very hard, and we've got plans with GLREA to try and increase the number of members within legislative districts. We're going to encourage more of our members to send emails, make phone calls, and to testify and come to hearings. All the hearings now are online. You don't have to go to Lansing. And so we encourage people to testify. So the 1% bill is very important for us. A second bill, which is very important, is community solar. We don't have a community solar law in Michigan that requires the utilities to connect to the grid what is known as community solar projects. And the reason why community solar is so important is that if your house doesn't face south, or your house has got a lot of trees, or you live in an apartment, or you live in a condominium, then you really can't have a small scale solar system for your house. Now, other states in the country have community solar laws, like the state of Minnesota. And so third-party developers can build a solar farm in Minnesota where they build a system and then they sell panels to individuals, and the individuals can take the investment tax credit to reduce the cost of buying those panels, just as if those solar panels were located on your roof of your home or on your farm or on your ground. And then the electricity that those panels generate will be virtually connected to your home, and it will reduce the amount of electricity that you have to buy from the utility. And if you buy enough panels, it will, just like any normal solar system, it can offset your entire load. But in Michigan, because we don't have this law, the utilities, they could do it if they wanted to, but they don't want to do it because it frankly is a challenge to their business model, and they don't want to do it. And so once again, we've got legislators, bipartisan legislators, House and Senate, that are willing to introduce the bill, but we have to work on the politics, and we need to build public support and provide pressure on legislators, or we need to provide political cover to get the legislator to feel comfortable in voting against a utility that's in opposition to it. Another key pill is what's known as energy aggregation. The city of Ann Arbor is a classic case. The city of Ann Arbor has a very ambitious plan to reduce carbon pollution for the residents of Ann Arbor. And so what they want to do is to do energy aggregation, where the city of Ann Arbor as a city wants to buy all renewable energy from third-party developers, and then they will turn right around and sell that electricity to the residents of Ann Arbor at a lower cost, because Ann Arbor is buying in bulk, and because renewable energy is cheaper than energy from DTE, that they'll be able to pass on those savings to all residents of Ann Arbor. But we don't have a law in Michigan that requires that the utilities have to work with cities who want to do this. Of all places, even Ohio has this. Columbus, Ohio has energy aggregation. And Ohio, in some ways, is further behind in Michigan, but not in this case. And so we need to do this. And the final kind of bill is microgrids. Microgrids is a technology where, different organizations or neighborhoods or institutions can create their own kind of mini utility, like Michigan State. Michigan State's very aggressive in putting solar panels up on all their parking lots. They want to be completely independent in terms of generating their own electricity. They essentially want to create their own microgrid. So if their major grid goes down because of a loss of power, then MSU can spin itself off and continue operating because they've got their own microgrid. Hospitals want to do the same thing. Army bases want to do the same thing. But because we don't have a law in Michigan that allows this to occur, they can't really do that. And so these are four bills. I'm going to stop there. What questions do people have that I can take? And I'll be glad to come back if we want to talk more about this process. But go ahead.
Hi, this is Mike Booz. I got a quick self-serving question. I've had my solar system on my house for over a decade. So when the law passed about getting rid of net metering, I still kind of get those rates for another 10 years after consumers, which is my energy producer, passes a new rate. When did that occur for consumer?
Well, that took effect. The Public Service Commission made their decision. I can't remember the exact date. It was around December 15th or 16th or 17th. There is a 10-year grandfathering clause that also applied to DTE too. It applied to all the regulated utilities, that from 10 years from the day you installed your system, you still can operate under the old net metering system until that 10 years runs out. The theory behind it is that 10 years is about the time that you'll pay off your system. So if you installed your system under the old net metering rules, then you probably calculated the return on investment with your solar installer based upon being able to send electricity back to the grid when you're producing more than you needed, and you're able to, build up your credits. And so the idea is that 10 years should be about the time it will take to pay off your system. So then once you paid off your system, you're not going to care as much if now you're getting only about 8 cents for the credit for installing solar on the grid. But like I said, the law of unintended consequences is rearing its ugly head. And the other thing I didn't mention when I brought this up 20 minutes ago is that the cost of batteries is coming down dramatically as well, in large part because of Tesla and their huge manufacturing operation for lithium-ion batteries. But a lot of people now are saying, fine, if the utilities are trying to undercut my ability to install the system by undercutting net metering to the new DG tariff, I'm now going to install batteries. So when my solar system generates more electricity than I need, I'm going to dump it into my batteries, and then I'll just use it when I need it. And that's kind of a get around the system.
Okay, so the 10 years clock starts from December or from when I had my system installed?
When you had your system installed, essentially.
Okay, so I've been way past 10 years. I mean, I should have kicked in several months ago, but I'm still seeing.
You won't see it several months. You probably should see something soon. But whatever you do, don't say anything. Don't speak up. That's key. Because some of these institutions, they don't react real carefully about things. So
I have a question about strategy. There's 4 different.
Is this Jeannie?
Gina, yeah, hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
I have a question about strategy, about how we're gonna deploy on attacking legislation and supporting legislation. One, has the board given any thought about follow-up from this webinar? And
Which webinar?
well, this discussion here.
Yes, well, go ahead. You finish your question, I'll respond.
And then there's 4 pieces of legislation. Is one more of a higher priority than others? And then the other piece is, we obviously have a connection to Ms. Granholm. Is there a way to maybe get a handle on what she foresees as some priority areas? And is there a way to volunteer Michigan to be a test site or anything along those lines to make some things happen?
It's a great question. The first two bills, the 1% and the community solar bills, those are the 2 top priorities. Secondly, we're setting up a planning committee of board members, but I want to extend this to other members as well, where we're going to build out our My Son chapters. I want to try and have a My Son chapter in every single state representative district in the state of Michigan. In other words, I want to build 110 different little GLREA chapters in each state representative district. I'm trying to set up a planning committee of my board members. I attempted to have it today and tomorrow. I'm trying to figure out a time that the board members that volunteered to be on it can all get together. But we're going to do this. I want to roll this. I've got a specific plan. I want to roll it by my board first, and then I'm going to set up a Zoom call with members to talk about this. And we're going to be looking for, this is going to be volunteer driven. We're going to have a lot of volunteers to be driving this process, because I think there's nothing that's more important to improve the strength of an organization than its membership getting involved and its membership being active with where they live in terms of contacting their state legislators, because legislators respond mostly to people within their district. As soon as Governor Granholm was nominated and was going to be appointed to be the Department of Energy, I immediately emailed her my congratulations. And I said to her point blank that GLREA will be there to support you in any and all of your work, and that Michigan will stand behind you. And if we can position Michigan to be supportive of your work, you just let us know, and we will be glad to work with you. Because I think, Gina, your comments is spot on. And I think we're going to try and take advantage of our connections with the federal government. And I think all of you, it's pretty obvious that Michigan is an absolutely important state politically across the country. You saw how important it was for the 2016 election for the president, the 2020 election for president, as well as the election for president in 4 years. And so once again, those people and organizations and institutions that help people that are currently in positions of establishing policy, we can have some influence for them because they want to get reelected at the federal level, just like those local legislators want to get reelected at the state level. So we're going to work with them.
And then just a follow up on the community solar, has the legislation been developed already? Or, and if so, were there other interest groups involved in the development of that legislative language? Like local planners and tax assessors and anybody and everybody?
To answer your question, the legislation was introduced last cycle, I think by Michelle Hoytinga. She's, I think, a Republican in mid-Michigan. I don't personally know her, but I heard her speak. We're finding out whether she has an interest in reintroducing the legislation. I'm sure she does. Because we have a bifurcated legislature, we have a Democratic governor and Republicans control the House and Senate. We want all of our bills to be bipartisan. We want sponsors to be both Democrat and Republican. We want to work with both parties on building support. And so that's very important. So other groups that we work with, the EIBC, Energy Innovation Business Council, we work with them very closely. Jim Murray is heading up a community solar coalition, some type of coalition that's in the beginning stages. The Sierra Club, I think Farm Bureau will be interested. Civil rights groups will be. I think some business organizations will be as well. It's 8:02, John. So we normally wrap up at 8 o'clock. So I just want to make a concluding comment. I want to work with all of you that are interested, and I want all of you to feel free to contact me with questions, but I will be back in touch with you about our plans about building out the grassroots network of GLREA. Along with building these chapters, we also want to increase the membership as well. And so we can have more members all over the state that can also contact their legislators. And so my final comment is that the legislative system is, again, a system of power to establish public policy that guides our state. If we don't get involved with this system, then we're leaving it up to our opponents to have a wide open field to do whatever they want. And so anytime you're promoting change, which is what we're doing, we have to push and we have to nudge. And so that's why we have to get involved with the legislative process, because we need to push them and nudge them. But what is a huge factor in support is that the public support for renewable energy keeps growing year after year. And the market forces are promoting renewable energy because it's lower costing energy, it saves people money, it promotes a cleaner public health, it reduces pollution. All of these are important, and that's why we're going to win ultimately against those that are fighting us. So thank you so much for your time and attention, and thank you, John, for allowing me to come on tonight.
Sure. Let me mention kind of, we've got some changes coming for our Zoom series. And one is starting in February, we're going to reduce the number of, actually my solar story, which is, the exchange of information about your experiences with solar systems, whether you're a building operator or homeowner. But Mark Levy, who you see is on the Zoom tonight, is starting a new series, which is going to have broader topics related to clean energy. In fact, our first speaker in that series will be John Richter, who's kind of our senior policy analyst on the board of GLREA. And he's been a witness in our interventions in the Public Service Commission. So we're going to be talking about some of the cases we've been involved with Consumers Energy and DTE, and be able to answer your questions about some of the things that have happened and might be happening in the future. The other thing I think is that, there's, I noticed in the chat room, there's a lot of questions and discussion and stuff. I think it'll be worth it for me to just have a session for those interested where we can ask questions and have some open discussion and not actually have a presentation. So I think I'll start that up in February too. One reason that would be helpful too is that, boy, John's going to be real busy this year, as all of us as renewable energy advocates, because there's going to be a lot happening in the legislature every week, every month. There's going to be a lot happening in Washington, D.C. with a new administration. So I think having some open discussion and kind of people sharing what they know and what they have heard about could be helpful to all of us. So I guess, if there's Kate, you had a question, right? So why don't I let you ask? No? Okay, you're going to pass. Okay. Does anybody want to have a last question before we adjourn?
Yeah, this is John Gorley. Can I ask, how do we find out who's been contributing to our legislators?
Oh, campaign contributions are all on public record. Legislators have to file the campaign finance report several times a year. One is due in about a week.